Hi, I'm Chris Hamill, Chief Geologist with UEX Corporation, and I'm here today with CEO Roger LeMay. We're here to have an informal conversation about some of the questions that we receive from our investors. So, to kick it off, the price of uranium has struggled over the past several years. Can you explain the fundamentals of uranium pricing? What is your pricing outlook?
Well, long-term pricing outlook is undoubtedly good for uranium, whether that's today, tomorrow, or a couple of years in the future. There's no doubt uranium prices are going to have to go up. Today, uranium prices are lower than the cost of production for even the lowest cost producers in the world, and that's just not sustainable. Meanwhile, some of the world's largest mines, which make up about 80% of the supply, are declining, and some of them are shutting down in the next 5 years. Prices have been hurt since the Fukushima incident because there's been a short-term oversupply in the market. Meanwhile, during that oversupply, utilities haven't had to buy and big suppliers haven't had to sell uranium because they've been sold on long-term contracts. Those long-term contracts were signed in the last uranium run-up in 2006, 7, and 8, and then through 9. And those contracts generally have a 10-year window. And they're just starting to roll over in 2018 and more so in 2019. But right as the rollover was starting to occur, we had a very interesting development happen in the United States with a couple of smaller ISR producers lodging a Section 232 complaint, and it's actually put the whole industry, buyers and sellers, a little bit of a short-term pause and wait till they see what the results of that petition will be.
There's been a lot of discussion in the uranium industry regarding Section 232 in the U.S. Can you provide us with a summary of what Section 232 is and how it has affected the uranium industry thus far?
Well, Section 232 is a provision in the U.S. Laws pertaining to the Department of Commerce, where they have the ability for national security reasons to impose certain trade actions, be them quotas, be them tariffs on imports of material into the United States. So in the case of the uranium, these two smaller producers in the U.S. Have claimed that the lack of U.S. production is a national security issue, and it's an interesting argument because, quite frankly, the U.S. produces about 1% of its domestic requirements today for consumption in nuclear reactors, and that works out to about somewhere around 1 million pounds. They are roughly 25% of the world's demand. They have 25% of the world's reactors, and so they're arguing that their national security interests are at risk, be it through national defense or through the electricity grid. So they're claiming that they can produce more if there was protections for American companies, whether it be American utilities have to provide quotas for how much they have to buy American, or whether there's trade tariffs brought in. And right now, the Department of Commerce has gone through that whole process, made a recommendation, and we're now in the 90-day window, expected to be closed around mid-July, where the White House has to make a decision about what actions they take. And the actions could be fourfold. One, they could do nothing and let the status quo exist, and then that will probably just keep the market going the way it has been going over the last 20 years. They could produce tariffs and say all imported uranium comes into the United States and goes subject to some sort of tariff, similar to what we've seen in Canada with the aluminum and steel tariffs that were put in about a year ago. Or they could decide that there's a quota system in place where so much has to be bought American. And I think that's really the goal of the American producers. They would put a serious premium on their supply, and they would try to ramp up to meet that demand. It'd be a serious premium in the market. It's an interesting time for the uranium market because while this deliberation has been going on, the market, both buyers and sellers, have stopped buying and selling because they're not sure what the rules will be. The American market is a significant part of the uranium consumption market, and so American utilities certainly don't want to be in a situation where their contracting portfolio violates U.S. law because of what provisions could come in Section 232. The rest of the world is sitting there saying, well, if Section 230 comes in with quotas, there'll be potentially oversupply around the rest of the world, or vice versa, nothing happens at all, and we go back to where things are at. So they're just waiting to see what the rules are so they know how to play the game.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you. UEX has a large portfolio of 18 uranium projects with 98.6 million pounds of resources. Can you summarize which are your advanced projects and which are most likely to be developed first?
So we have four, like most companies, we have four flagship uranium projects. The one that's closest to development is probably our Horseshoe Raven project in the eastern Athabasca Basin, where we have a substantial resource right in the middle of all the infrastructure, literally a road and power line go right over the property to service one of the existing mine sites. And we think that project will probably move forward, but we also know that it can't go forward at today's prices. Since even the lowest cost producers are underwater, there's no way we can produce today. So we're looking forward to the prices moving in the right direction. We can move that project forward first. So our second flagship project is our West Spur Cobalt project. Well, that's not a uranium project. It's one of the few cobalt resources in Canada. And we're on the forefront of developing the Athabasca Basin into a primary world-class cobalt district. That's our goal, at least. Our third project would be our Christie Lake project. It's the only uranium project owned by a junior company located directly between McArthur River and Cigar Lake, the two of the world's largest and highest grade mines. And we've got a resource there right now of that we're continuing to develop and grow and add more pounds to that deposit. Our fourth flagship project would be the Shea Creek project, which we teamed up with Orano. We own 49.1% of that. And it's in the western Athabasca Basin where all the other rash of recent discoveries have been made, and that project will be part of the development of that part of the Athabasca Basin in the future.
Well, exciting times, thank you. In 2018, UEX initiated cobalt exploration program on the West Bear project in Saskatchewan. Why did UEX venture into the cobalt industry? What has been accomplished at West Bear? Is there a possibility of a spin-out of the company's cobalt assets? If so, when? Three parts.
We get asked the spin-out question a lot. And let me work through the questions you have here and then I'll get to the spin-out part at the end. We actually made a discovery of cobalt on our West Bear project in 2003 as a result of looking for extensions to an existing uranium deposit. Cobalt and nickel have been known to be associated with the Athabasca Basin uranium project, or several of them, for decades now, but they've never been looked at for their economic value. In fact, cobalt and nickel are often used as a pathfinder to look for uranium deposits, but never actually used to look for their own type of deposit, be it cobalt or nickel. So in 2005, we did a little bit of work. We got a sniff of a concept of this cobalt thing might have some dimensions, and the uranium market took off in 2005. We were involved in 4 discoveries back then. Cobalt price declined. There was a short-term spike related to the adoption of smartphones, because you get cobalt in your lithium cobalt batteries in the smartphones. But meanwhile, uranium was on a race from $7 a pound to eventually $138 a pound, and our focus went completely into that. 2 years ago, when cobalt became interesting because of the EV battery or EV car adoption sort of trend that's going on right now, we sort of said, we have a cobalt deposit, we should look at that, and kind of laughed. And then we started watching what was being put out in the cobalt market. We realized we actually had something significant. And so we decided to work on West Bear, grow the existing deposit, a sniff of a deposit we had into something with dimensions, which we did last year. We invested about $1.6 million over about 41 holes, and proof the concept that we can find uranium-free cobalt nickel deposits in the Athabasca Basin, which have never previously been looked for. And we think it's a model we can take across all the rest of our property holdings and across the basin in general. We could be the UX could be the cobalt leader in Canada and North America. There's a real need for cobalt coming from a place other than the Democratic Republic of Congo, where child labor and challenging ethical practices are involved in supplying over 70% of the world's cobalt. And in our car makers want to see cobalt come from secure and safe and ethically sourced sources, and Saskatchewan certainly is that. We've been, since we've got the property, our goal has always been to maximize value for shareholders. So we've gone through processes where we looked at even selling that project outright or finding joint venture partners, and we settled on last year probably a potential spin out. And while we were committed to going down that path, and we were right got to the 11th hour, we needed to do our 43-101 report that we did on the West Spur last year. By the time we got that done and we're ready to do a spin out, the cobalt market collapsed in July. And while we could spin it out, our goal has always been spinning it out or finding value to maximize current shareholder value, not future shareholders' value, not future shareholder value, future shareholders. So people who are in our stock today, we want to see them get the maximum benefit from the cobalt assets. So we could spin it out tomorrow and give away more than half of the property to new investors that would come in as after the spin out occurred. And we don't think that's very fair to shareholders. So our goal is to find the right time. We're ready to pull the trigger at any moment now to do a spin out if that's the right approach, or to find another way to maximize shareholders or maximize value for today's shareholders, not the shareholders who come in tomorrow.
Oh, thanks for that. That's great. I understand you recently attended and spoke at the Benchmark Minerals World Tour for electric vehicle batteries in New York and Toronto. What is Cobalt's role and importance in the electric vehicle battery? Can you comment on the current status of the EV battery industry and the future demand for ethically sourced cobalt?
Well, I'll start with the last question first. You're seeing a lot of car companies like Volkswagen, Ford, and Audi, for example, come in and try to find secure sources, not just secure, but safe sources of cobalt and ethically sourced ones. And there's all sorts of weird things going on as they scramble to try to find or make sure that their source of cobalt is clean. And I think it's also an interesting industry that started off. Most industries start off as sort of local industries. They go up the local scale, they go to the regional scale, they go to the national scale, then they go global. The EV industry has actually started global and is working its way back. And a thing that Benchmark showed us last week or a week or two ago was that we're just at the cusp of the beginning of a global EV arms race for either, you can call it dominance or even just for energy security today. And that the Western markets are catching up. You see it in Europe happening very quickly as they try to do strategic things to help encourage EVs in their production of EVs and the supply chain around that, which includes all the way down to cobalt. Cobalt's an integral part of electric vehicle batteries. I think they're important for their thermal characteristics. They don't expand and crack. They're high density, so they provide a lot of energy density. And of course, when you're having a car battery, the last thing you want to do is have it crack open during an accident, or you don't want your battery to wear out and not be able to hold a charge any longer because it's based on basically your range while you buy a car. So there was a lot of news of this time last year where people were trying to find ways to engineer out cobalt because cobalt prices were really high. And there's a lot of news about that and a lot of fluff and research and such. And I think what Benchmark has shown us over the last year, that things have settled down quite a bit. They're not going to engineer cobalt out of batteries. They will try to reduce the amount of cobalt in each battery, but the rate at which EVs are being adopted today, basically there'll be less volume of cobalt per unit of battery. There could be a whole lot more units out there than previously thought. So, in cobalt battery, and even their Benchmark is calling it by 2028, the cobalt demand will rise 125%. So that's a huge growth industry, but the biggest challenge is where do you get it from? And I think that's where our advantage comes into play with West Spur. We're talking about the world's number 3 mining investment jurisdiction, but the number 1 from a policy perception index. A lot of history of mining, and the local communities have had substantial benefits and are pro-mining. And I think if we can bring a supply source of cobalt to the market, it would be in high demand for particularly Western automakers who are not designing their EV cars that are going to sell 5 years ago. In 5 years, they're designing it today. So they need today's technology, today's batteries. They're going to be building cars 5 years from now. And right now, they're very high cobalt batteries.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Roger. We hope to be able to continue this forum in the future, and we just want to thank everyone for their time.